my stars. Oh, Steve. Welcome to the Chinwag, by the way. Steve was just telling me that he has notes.
Copious notes.
Copious notes. Believe it or not, we actually have notes on this show. You have copious notes from every episode that we've done?
Yeah. What's funny is we'll interview somebody or we'll pick a topic like today, and I'll do a bunch of research, and we don't get to half the shit.
I know.
I thought it was going to be good.
Me too. That happens a lot when we talk to somebody. We'll have all this stuff, and then I'll be like, fuck, I didn't get to anything. We got off in some tangent talking about, like, do you like monkeys or something?
Right.
And it's like, what's your favorite monkey? And then it's just like...
And I have all this gold in the notes, but no, we're talking about monkeys the whole time.
We're going to get... I think when you and I just go tete-a-tete, we have... we get this stuff more. I'm determined to get to all the shit I have today. I don't care. Nobody's stopping me because
it's the true Chinwag, though. Like, it's good for it to just deviate and ramble around.
No, it's true. It's true.
And
I feel like at some point we always get back to this shit we don't say.
Yeah.
I somehow managed to get this shit out there, and it's like very funny. Oh my goodness gracious. Well, here we are.
Yeah, good to see you, my friend.
Nice to see you, my friend.
We should remind people to head on down and rank and review us at Apple and Spotify and all those places.
Correct. And keep peppering us with questions and comments and
letters.
And letters and stuff like that.
And we have a kind of Chinwag challenge for everyone, which is if you're enjoying this episode, and I know you are, then text it to your friends, pick one of your oddball friends and send it to them. It's so easy to share it. And that really helps us out too.
Yeah, just keep it going. Yep, that kind of thing would be nice.
Or if you're just trying to irritate someone who really doesn't like weird stuff.
No interest in any of this crap.
Yeah, this is the way to do it.
Just harass your friends with this. Just keep sending it to them. They'll be like, what the hell is this thing you keep sending me? That's not a bad idea. Well, Steve, this is an exciting episode we have coming up. I'm unnaturally excited about this. It's kind of unseemly. It's a little unseemly how excited I am about this. We've talked about doing this one for a while.
Yeah, you brought this up, I think, around the Hollow Earth. You were like, we should look at the moon. And I was like, well, there can't be that much. And
that's right.
Oh, no.
Oh, boy. Oh, yes, there is.
A Niagara of information.
This was one of these ones where it kept endlessly branching off into another rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And then a rabbit hole off the rabbit hole, and it just kept going. And it was insane. And
this is
really,
a great
really
topic.
interesting. So this is basically kind of moon lore is what we would call it.
Moon lore and legends,
right?
yes.
Legends, conspiracies.
Unexplained.
The unexplained, just kind of everything, folklore, all kinds of things.
Yeah. We've got like folklore, cultural stuff, but also science.
There's some science. Yeah. Buckle up.
Well, what might gravitational anomalies.
Oh,
and
yeah.
so
No,
forth.
absolutely. Yeah, I'm going to get really erudite with the science. Oh, hold on as you get a fucking blizzard of science from me. But yes, we will hit on some vaguely scientific concepts. Vaguely from me. You might be more on top of it than I am.
There are interesting scientific features about the moon, but it quickly shades to pseudoscience.
And the interesting thing is, yes, it does. But it's actually, it seems ripe for that because there's genuinely weird stuff about the moon.
There
is. That is not sort of, rumor, hearsay, pseudoscience. There's actually weird stuff about the moon.
Yeah.
That's kind of odd and unexplained and yeah.
I think that's one of the things that I really enjoyed about doing this research is that I didn't really know much about the moon in general. And now
Yes. No, neither did I. And I didn't know about a lot of this stuff either that I came across. So that was it was exciting because I was like, all of this shit is really new to me. I
know.
And even some of the weird stuff that I sort of knew about, I was like, oh, I didn't know. I didn't think of certain connections and I didn't know this about it.
Well, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. I can kick us off with the kind of with the really easy, with the fucking the ringer, the kind of low hanging fruit, the low hanging fruit of that epic day, Steve, July 20th, 1969. When we didn't land on the moon, when it was all
when it all started.
So that's like the kind of grand big target conspiracy of the whole thing is that there was never any landing on the moon.
It seems bigger than ever, too. That conspiracy seems larger than I remember it being.
Yeah, interesting you say that. One of the funny statistics I saw is from about 5 or 6 years ago, which was that 5 to 10% of Americans don't believe we landed on the moon, which I imagine now is more.
It's even more. Wow.
I would bet it is now. But interestingly, 12% of Britons don't believe it.
What?
I don't know. This is hilarious. 20% of Italians don't believe it.
How could this is hilarious? What a breakdown.
I count myself among that number. 20%. But I'm like, why did we bother to go to the Italians? It's like, well, let's see what the Italians think.
Let's see what the Italians think on this.
Exactly. They're smart. They must think this is bullshit. 57% of Russians, which doesn't surprise me.
Wait, hold on. Are you telling?
Well, this is interesting.
Oh, because they lost the space race.
There's
so
that.
They got a chip on their shoulder. Is that
exactly? Well, and I'll get to that because that's actually an interesting thing about what the Soviets. So yes, I think there's a chip on their shoulder. I also just think
fascinating.
Russia is the land of like nothing is real, nothing is true. I mean, it's amazing, more and more. But I would guess yes that there's more. That those numbers have gone up now.
Wow.
You know. Yeah, I mean, it's like the flat Earth thing and stuff. I feel like it's caught on more, right?
I used to ask my students, and in the old days, we'd all have a good guffaw about it. Like, isn't this hilarious? But I notice more and more now, people aren't laughing. They're like, yeah, well, it seems more reasonable to people that we've never been to the moon. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, yes, that's the story. And I think the idea was they couldn't, it's interesting. They really couldn't afford it. They ran out of money. So they didn't really complete everything. So it had to be fake.
Oh.
But also, and I can't remember whether I'm conflating this with the movie Capricorn 1. Did you ever see Capricorn 1?
Oh my God, I loved that movie.
Great
when I was
movie,
a kid.
right?
I think Brolin,
Yes, that's right. James Brolin plays the guy. And that's a fake Mars mission.
Love that movie.
But in that movie, and I might be conflating, you know, why not just borrow from the movie to build on the theory, the conspiracy theory, that in that one, it's that they realize the tech isn't going to work and that they'll burn up on reentry, so they have to fake it. And I think maybe that shades into the actual moon landing conspiracy. But the whole thing apparently comes from a guy named Bill Casing, who was a technical writer for Rocketdyne, which makes me laugh. Because have you ever read The Crying of Lot 49, that Pynchon novel, Thomas Pynchon novel? You should. It's great because there's a play on that called Yo-Yo-Dyne, which is this kind of goofy rocketry company. But it's the company, Rocketdyne's the company that made the engines for the Apollo missions, I guess. And he was an engineer for them, former Navy engineer. And he wrote a book called We Never Went to the Moon, America's $30 billion Swindle in like 1971 or something like that.
No shit.
Yeah. And not too long after the actual landing. And it was kind of like everything was ripe for this because it was Watergate. You had the Pentagon Papers, which is when those Daniel Ellsberg stole those papers, and they were, I think it was mostly the Johnson administration. It proved that they'd been lying about fatalities in Vietnam.
In Vietnam, yeah.
Way more people were getting killed.
We were losing our trust in the government in general.
In general, like a lot of that stuff. I'd forgotten there was the House Select Committee on Assassinations, which went against the Warren Report and said that there was a conspiracy to kill Kennedy. I forgot about that.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, I forgot about that. So there was all this kind of like crazy ass sort of, and then also somebody said, this is interesting, that in line with sort of the JFK conspiracy, there was a lot of official record people could go directly to look at. And this was kind of a new aspect of conspiracy mongering.
Freedom of information.
Yes,
acts
exactly.
And shit like that.
Yeah, and now there was all this photographic evidence of stuff, and you could look at the fucking moon pictures, and you could look at all this stuff. So yeah, so you have this whole conspiracy which rests on a lot of different things. I mean, the general paranoia, but then there's kind of 5 bullet point things that people point to a lot to say, and a lot of it rests on the photographs from the moon and stuff like that. Like the flag in the pictures of the flag is flapping. It looks like it's flapping. And
it shouldn't be moving at all, given that there's no atmosphere.
And the whole explanation for that is that if they had a real flag, it would have just hung limply down. And so they had a flag that was strung out onto a kind of an arm that came off the pole of the flag. And that actually was crumpled from being in a compartment somewhere.
That makes
sense. And
sense.
it didn't uncrumple. So, because there's no gravity, it didn't change. And so it's crumpled looking, so it looks like it's flapping. So that's one of the things that people point to.
Interesting.
And then you can't see stars in any of the pictures that they're taking, which is all explainable by like quick exposures and their daylight pictures and quick exposures
of the camera they're using.
Yeah, and that it just the background blacks out. You won't see the stars.
Yeah, that's not enough to hang a theory like this on.
The same way you go out on the porch. You go to the porch.
The flag, I was with you. But
yeah, I know.
The snow.
You turn on the porch lights and the stars will disappear beyond the porch, because it's like...
light pollution.
Yeah, exactly. And so then there's the shadows is a big one. And there's endless stuff about the shadows are pointing the wrong way and the shadows are pointing in opposing directions. And the shadows is an endless literature about the freaking shadows in the pictures, that they're all
suggesting
wrong.
That there's like movie lights on,
exactly.
on a set.
Suggesting that there's Klieg light or movie lights and shit. Yes, exactly. And that's because the lunar surface scatters the sunlight in a lot of ways. So you get all these different angles because it's bouncing off of this like incredibly reflective surface. So you're getting crazy angles and stuff like that. Things like Neil Armstrong isn't holding a camera. You can see in, I think it's Buzz Aldrin's face mask in the sort of gold-plated, that sort of, you can see Neil Armstrong taking the picture, but he doesn't have a camera. He's not holding anything. And that's because...
that sounds suspicious.
Oh, okay. Here you go, Steve. I knew you'd like that one. Here he goes.
Okay.
But that's because they
Explain
built...
that one, smart guy.
They built the camera into the front of his suit. And you can actually see his hand sort of
very
up.
Convenient.
But it's, okay, I love this. You're going with it. One of the best aspects, though, of course, is that Stanley Kubrick faked the whole thing. And this is like, that. And this is an amazing, well, first of all, I think it was that, I don't know when Kubrick comes into the mix, but first of all, the thing is that it's all faked and that they shot it in a studio in Nevada.
Well, when is 2001 released? When is
1969. So I guess, it was a little bit of an audition for him, I guess, 2001 was a story. And it is funny how much 2001 does look like the thing. Yeah. And even, how much he captures the way astronauts talk to each other and stuff. I mean, it's believable in some ways because you are sort of like, but I don't know whether he was immediately in the mix of that or whether that comes a little later, that it was like, Kubrick must have done it. But there are it's funny because there are sort of eyewitness accounts of when they were supposedly on the moon. Neil Armstrong was seen in a hotel in Nevada in a lobby with some showgirls. And Buzz Aldrin was playing. Buzz Aldrin was playing the slots and stuff like that. That there's eyewitness accounts of I
hope that's true.
I hope it's true
so
too.
Funny.
But I mean, wouldn't it be just like the government to let
getting wasted in Vegas?
Yeah, to let the guys run around in a fucking hotel in Vegas. And supposedly then they were flown to Hawaii and put into a fake capsule that I guess had been made to look like it came through reentry and stuff like that.
For just newsreel footage at the end or something. I see.
Yeah. So
I like the way you queued this up, each point by point, and then knocked it out with the whole
with hard-hitting evidence.
Science.
Thanks a lot, man. We said we'd get to science, didn't we? Yes, indeed. Yeah, it's all the facts for me. This is all about the facts.
Well, did Kubrick ever officially state anything on this?
Well, funny you should ask, Steve. Thank you for teeing that one up for me. Thank you. Well, yes, there was a few years ago, hilariously, there was a guy who claimed to have filmed a kind of final, as Kubrick was dying, a final sort of message from Stanley Kubrick. You can see it on YouTube. It's ridiculous. The guy doesn't look like, the guy supposedly is Kubrick. It doesn't look like him. He doesn't sound like him. But it's very funny. And I happen to have a little bit of, I want to do a little dramatic reading here of the transcript from this. I found something here, and this is just a little bit of it. But here's a little background. It says, a stunning new video has emerged 15 years after Stanley Kubrick's death. This was a couple of years ago, in which Kubrick admits that the NASA moon landings were faked. Filmmaker T. Patrick Murray, the great T. Patrick Murray, interviewed Kubrick 3 days before his death, March 1999. He was forced to sign an 88-page NDA to keep the concept of the interview secret for 15 years. Below is a transcript from the interview with Kubrick. in which he admits it. In the interview, allegedly, he says, Kubrick, I perpetrated a huge fraud on the American public, which I am now about to detail, involving the United States government and NASA, that the moon landings were faked, that all the moon landings were faked, and that I was the person who filmed it. Murray. Okay. It says laughs in parentheses. What are you talking about? You're serious. Okay. Kubrick.
Oh, this is badly written.
No. Kubrick. I'm serious. Dead serious. Yes, it was fake. Murray. Why are you telling this little world? Why does the world need to know that the moon landings aren't real and you faked them? Kubrick. Because I consider it to be my masterpiece. Murray. And you can't take credit or even talk about it. Kubrick. Well, I am now. Murray. So you can't talk to Roger Ebert about it. That's what he says to him. Does that frustrate you? Why did they have to fake it? Why would they have to do that, Kubrick? Because it's impossible to get there. 2001 was very ambitious, but that's not to say that faking the moon landings was not ambitious. But I learned things from making 2001. That's why I got this gig in the first place.
Oh, my God. This is rich.
Murray says, that makes sense. Kubrick says, well, it was easy for me because I didn't think a whole lot about the morality of it. But I didn't. But I could see that Neil Armstrong, he was very bothered by it. and he goes on later in the thing to say, look, anybody could have done this. Spielberg, Scorsese, Woody Allen. That's what he says later, like Woody Allen.
Woody Allen.
Yeah. But I love the idea that he was working with Neil Armstrong, and Neil Armstrong's like, nah, I'm not doing this. And he's like, Neil, just walk out of the capsule one more time. Come on, Neil. And he's just like,
these tough American guys like, what the fuck is going on?
Yeah, what
here?
is this sissy shit? You're going to put makeup on me and make me get out of a capsule? Anyway, I just wanted to read a little bit of that. So, but that was all clearly fake, and none of it was obviously true. But yeah, as you say, people still buy this. People still really buy it. But there's something
attractive about, like, I'd say, like, all these moon stories that we're going to get into. There's a lot of it that I so desperately want to be true because it's so fun.
I know. It's super fun. I don't know why it's particularly hilarious.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's really fun.
And it's like, but then there's a whole contravening thing to it. When I was a kid, I had a book called Somebody Else is on the Moon by, I can't remember the guy's name. And that whole theory was, that very much believed we went there, and that we went there and discovered all this shit that was already there. There were bases, and that ties into the Nazis had bases on the moon. And that ties into this whole kind of fear that the Nazis were ahead of us technologically with rocketry, and that we had all the kind of former Nazis, that Operation Paperclip was bringing all those Nazi scientists over to NASA to build the rockets and build, and develop the space program. And the idea too that, I love this one writer I was reading talked about how, the idea that the Nazis will never go away. They're even on the moon.
They're on the moon.
They went to South America. They're everywhere. They're on the moon.
They're in the hollow earth.
Yeah. But so then there's this whole contravening thing where they very much believed that we went there, but there was other shit there that was already there. And there's a whole bunch of that stuff. It
captures like something of the time, like you think about like the pressure of the Cold War period. But also, like you said, there's something sort of eternal too, because look at, countries are still trying to prove themselves technologically by sending something to the moon. India just did it. Japan just did it. China did it.
That's interesting. And it's almost even more important to get to the moon than it is to send the shit that's taking pictures of Neptune and stuff.
Right.
Because that's just a camera you throw out into space, I guess.
Symbolically, the moon is more important. Yeah.
Now, then this leads to one other thing. Just indulge me in one other thing.
No, do it.
And this is the interesting kind of, what was the Soviet reaction to the moon landing?
Oh, yeah.
And there was a whole sort of Soviet conspiracy theory grew up because they lost so much face. Now, the Soviets did everything. Their space program was amazing.
Yeah.
They did everything before we did it.
With dogs, chimps, cosmonauts.
They put Sputnik up. They put the first man up. They put the first woman up. They put the first thing that orbited the moon. They put the first man-made object on the moon. They put the steel ball.
Oh, did they?
With a Soviet flag on it. They shot out of a satellite to land on the moon.
Oh, I didn't know
They did everything first except get a person up there. So they lost terrible face. So then as this one guy that I read said, the idea was they had to maintain secrecy so no one would overtake us because our technology was so good. Then once they landed, we had to maintain secrecy so no one would know we had been overtaken. So they created the fiction that the space race never existed, that they never intended to go to the moon.
Oh, really?
That they had no intention of going to the moon, that they never wanted to, that their only goal was to put up satellites, robot probes, especially so that people wouldn't die. And they called the moon landing, quote, the fanatical squandering of wealth looted from the oppressed peoples of the developing world. So it was sold as this like fucking American, decadent Americans like blowing a ton of money. And it actually,
rich people.
Yeah, and it actually caught on in America. And there were senators, Senator Fulbright, who was a famous senator. He said that that clearly the idea grew that we were lying about there being a space race to justify spending all this money.
Wow.
And it was like, and so that actually caught on in America, and still kind of is what dogs NASA.
There's a whole movement of, there was, the sort of American, there was like a Black Power movement and a communist movement and sort of the left in general of hippie culture, and all of it saw the space program as incredibly wasteful.
Yeah.
And like just sort of capitalism run amok. So that,
and all the kind of, like all that Gil Scott Heron thing with Whitey on the Moon and all that stuff too. And all the that it was like just this bullshit. And
it's still, that's still a critique of space programs in general.
I have a friend who always destroys my romance about NASA for me, because he always goes, I mean, you realize it's just a wing of the Pentagon, right? I mean, you just realize it's all it is. And I'm always like, okay, because I'm all
the
like,
romance out.
Yeah, the romance of space travel. And he's like, well, they're just going up there and putting weapons on the fucking moon.
You're picturing like an H.G. Wells character who just loves nature and all that stuff.
Yeah, no, except I got this fucking cranky friend of mine who's just like, well, it's all bullshit, But anyway, in 1989, a delegation from MIT went over, fall of the Soviet Union, went over to kind of meet a bunch of Soviet scientists who admitted they had a lunar lander. And they showed these guys from MIT the lunar lander and revealed for the first time that indeed they had been building towards going to the moon, but we beat
How
them.
close were they? Did they say how close they were?
I read something that said they weren't as close. They weren't that close.
Oh.
They had the lander, but they really didn't know. And they had the lunar module and they didn't know, but they were pretty far behind.
That's enough to feel sorry for the Ruskies on this
kind
one.
of. And I don't know what happened to those poor guys. I wonder if they ended up in a gulag or something. I think at that point the gulags were not quite as big a thing as they were later.
They were probably like using an alternative, like a socialist physics to try to fucking get on the moon.
I thought of that. Oh shit! Yeah, totally. Just some ridiculous. That's hilarious. Yeah, probably. Anyway, that's your basic moon. We didn't land on the moon background.
Let me regale you with two historical cases, and then we'll come back and see where you're at too on this.
Okay.
I've got two cases that really intrigued me. One was, what's the first story of us going to the moon? And it appears to be this Greek. He's actually Syrian, but he writes in Greek, and he ends up spending time in Egypt working for the Emperor Commodus. If you remember, Commodus was like the son of Marcus Aurelius.
He was kind of a psycho, right?
Yeah, well, Commodus was kind of psycho. But this guy, Lucian, Lucian, great sort of Roman sort of satirist and poet, even though he's writing in Greek. And his shit is really hilarious. I think, have you read any Lucian before?
I think a long time ago, yeah. I mean, there's like a satire of the gods that he wrote where he makes fun of the gods and stuff like that. I remember that, yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
And in fact, he's so sarcastic that nobody can tell what he believed and what he was just making fun of. There's no way to tell with this guy.
That's awesome.
It's like totally postmodern.
Taking the piss out of everything. That's awesome.
Yeah, about everything. So he writes a story, and it's called, get this, it's called A True Story. And it's basically a story in which he, the main character, and 40 other human beings take a flight. Like they start out on a boat, but then they get lifted by the winds, and it keeps taking them up and up in a spiral until eventually they land on the moon. And when they arrive on the moon, they actually meet the moon men. So there's another civilization of people who live on the moon.
Right.
And they are engaging in a war with the people who live on the sun. And so the moon men and the sun men are in a war.
Oh, cool.
Trying to get like access to the morning star. And the earthlings are like, well, let's fight with you guys. So they team up with the moon men to fight the sun creatures. Right. And it's so crazy. Like they fly giant birds and they like have all these incredible fights with swords and spears on these giant birds.
Wow, that's awesome. That sounds like those Edgar Rice Burroughs Mars stories. Have you ever read those John Carter of Mars where they're all flying around with shit and they're fighting with swords and stuff on Mars? It sounds a lot like it.
It's exactly like that. I think Wells might have been influenced by this guy.
I bet all these guys were,
This shit is from, like, Lucian was born in 125 AD and dies in 180. Think how early that is.
Now, do you think anybody, because I guess the people who are reading this realize it's satire. Nobody's picking this up and going, oh shit. This guy.
I think this they knew was this one. A true story they knew was satire.
Nobody's as stupid then as they are now, is what I'm saying.
Well, there is that shit we talked about before, like Atlantis, where people were like, well, is it or is it not real? So, but this one, he was so over the top that people. But the other thing is that after they win this war with the moon people, then they're counterattacked by other sun creatures that are basically centaurs. So they're half man and half horses. And they fly in, they take them prisoner, and then somehow the guy escapes. And this is what my favorite part of the story is. They basically fall back to Earth. And when these guys end up in Earth, they hit the water and they're immediately swallowed by a 200-mile long whale.
Awesome.
Isn't that awesome? And then they live inside the whale for years because there's civilizations living inside the whale. Is that nuts?
That's totally nuts. And what's the whole thing where they've been getting swallowed by whales? I mean, it's like Jonah must be the first one, right?
I think that's a lot earlier, yeah. Because that's in the Old Testament.
It is earlier, right? And so it's like he must have gotten, and then fucking Pinocchio getting eaten by a dogfish. Right. I think it's a dogfish in the story.
Dogfish.
Right? Getting swallowed by a whale. That's interesting. Like, what's the whole thing? It's so interesting.
They get out by like setting a fire inside, but it has to burn for like a week before the thing actually spits them back out.
That's awesome.
That was a belief that you could, that basically like in this fictional version, you can go there and there are creatures living there, but there's also creatures living inside giant whales. It's just super fun. Now we got to fast forward to the 1600s. I'll tell you one more story that's historically interesting. And this is Johannes Kepler. Mm-hmm. So people know Kepler's name. He's like a German astronomer who's living at the same time as Galileo. Uh-huh. And he's the guy that figured out that it's an elliptical pathway around the sun.
Okay.
Not a perfect circle. And he was arguing for the Copernican view, which is sun in the center.
Is he the music of the spheres guy?
Yes. The harmony of the planets.
Which, by the way, there's an interesting story. You can go look at it on YouTube. There's a whole, among all this stuff of like, we went to the moon and we found weird shit. You can check this out on YouTube because it really did happen. Apollo, one of the other ones, 12 or 13, when they were, or maybe it was before, maybe it was Apollo 10. Then they were just orbiting the moon. There was a whistling sound coming from the moon. And you can go listen to the guys talk to each other. And it's very funny because the recording starts with one guy asking the other guy, "You want some more brownies?" And the other guy goes, "No," like that. And then they go, "Wait a minute, what's that sound?"
Great.
It's really funny. But anyway, and there's an explanation for it. There's an explanation for it being like weird feedback or interference between two communities. But anyway, sorry, I just keep going because music of the spheres.
No, that's great. I love that. And yeah, so they all thought that the math and the astronomy, motion, and music were all part of the same systems. That's a really cool idea.
That is cool.
He writes a novel. I didn't know this at all. I learned that he wrote a novel called The Dream. Mm-hmm. And he basically he died without publishing it, and then his son published it in 1634. So he writes the novel in 1608. It's about going to the moon. And here's the story. It's fucking crazy. An Icelandic boy, I read it just for our little conversation.
An Icelandic boy?
An Icelandic boy, yeah. And his mother, they learn about the moon from a spirit being. Now, the mother is actually a witch. This is crazy because the kid's mom is a witch, and she teaches him about the moon because she is in communication with a daemon or a spirit being. And the daemon or spirit tells her these secrets about the moon. And apparently Carl Sagan and Asimov read this and said this was one of the earliest sci-fi stories ever.
Sure, it's really cool. It sounds amazing.
And so they talk to this daemon. Now, here's one more quick aside. What's totally amazing about this is Kepler's writing this story, But Kepler's actual mom was accused of being a witch in real life.
Oh, interesting.
She was like in her 70s and he was in his 40s.
And then he goes on to be this guy that becomes this hard science guy who's like
he's
coming
actually
up.
He's publishing his most famous work at the moment when his mom is being accused of being a witch in prison.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Wow, that's really
crazy.
interesting. Oh, cool.
So anyway, they go to the moon, this is explained to him, that humans have to be sedated by the spirit beings to handle the stress of going to the moon because they're basically thrown there.
That's like putting people in in suspended animation. Wow, that's really cool. Wow.
And he says the spirit says we have to put damp sponges up their nostrils so they can breathe properly when they're in space. Isn't that cool?
That's really cool. That's amazing.
Yeah. And then so they land on the moon and they basically see that there's moon creatures, and then it just kind of suddenly ends. It's like has no plot developments,
Fuck it.
But here's the last thing on it. And then the last thing on it that's kind of cool is that the reason why he seems to have written it is that once you're on the moon and you're looking back at the Earth, he's describing everything as if the Earth was just another planet. So he's trying in a kind of literary way to prove the Copernican theory because he knows it's so controversial. And people still want to think of the Earth as at the center. And he's like, no, motherfuckers, listen to me.
Right.
This is how it would look if you were on the moon. So he's describing it, ad nauseum.
So it's like giving it to them in this kind of fun form of this is this kind of cool story. That's amazing. Now, he's not the guy who had like the metal nose. Is he? That's one of those.
I do not know.
One of those was
that did not come up in my research.
I'm sorry. But he's one of those guys got his nose cut off in a duel. I don't think it was Kepler. And he had to wear a bronze nose
or something.
That's it. That's who it was. That's
was
who it was.
Tycho Brahe? Okay.
Yes. He had his nose cut off in a duel, and he had to wear a bronze nose or a brass nose. But that's really cool. I want to check this out and see because that's so cool. But they're really cool. The sort of the fantasy thing, though, of the mother being a witch and conveying the knowledge about the moon, that's really cool. Wow. I was saying to you that I know that Cyrano de Bergerac, who I didn't know was a real person, I thought was a fictional character, was a real guy. He also wrote some famous trip to the moon story that was like very sort of influential in the like 17th century,
1700s?
Okay. Maybe early 17th, late 16, I don't know, something like that, but maybe 1700s, yeah. But I didn't know he was even a real person, but he wrote some kind of great. That's really cool. And then he got H.G. Wells and doing all that stuff later and stuff like that.
Yeah, then H.G. Wells, like basically in 1901, he writes The First Men in the Moon. And I'm pretty sure you've read that. I saw the movie from 1964.
Yes, I've read it, yeah.
That's a really fun story.
But here's the key word in the title of that story is First Men in the Moon.
Yes.
Because I think this maybe is a good segue to our next topic about the moon, which is my favorite one. And I didn't know a lot of shit and I think we both looked into this. So we both probably have a lot of information, which is that the moon is hollow. And that the moon is hollow, and then people have taken off from that and to go to B, the moon is a spaceship, is actually an alien vehicle.
That is a cool theory. It's a very cool theory.
It's a very cool theory. And I don't even know.
I'm not endorsing it, but
I'm not endorsing it either, but it is a big, one. And I think it ties into so many things. And again, now there's all kinds of science that goes into this. There's all kinds of, I think part of it is weird behaviors on the moon, strange seismic activity, weird vapor clouds, weird eruptions of things, all things that are true
real
about the moon, but they're odd. And there's sort of nobody really has a lot of explanation for it because oddly, not a whole hell of a lot is known about it still. Sort of the interior of the moon and stuff like that. And it's got a lot of, I think, enormous amounts of like very weird elements, titanium, uranium, all these like kind of very rare elements, tons of them up there, but they don't seem to go deeper than the surface of the moon, which people find strange.
And also the craters, one thing I read was that what's mysterious is the way the craters are so huge in terms of their circumference, but they're incredibly shallow. Like they're not as deep as you'd think they would be.
Right.
So they may have filled in maybe with lava.
Right.
We don't know.
Yeah, there's all kinds of weird stuff. Then there's also the fact that I guess for its size and mass, its density is projected to not be what you would think it would be. It's less dense for some reason, and they don't know why. And I think there's some legitimate people who think that there may be cavities in the moon, that it may sort of have pockets, empty pockets in the moon. And that I guess, but obviously imaginative people take this to the whole thing is hollow. But another thing I read was, did you read this about Apollo 12 deliberately crashed a sort of probe, and the impact set off these reverberations that, rang the moon like a bell for an hour. And then I guess Apollo 13 did the same thing, and it went on for 3 hours. And I guess that's weird because seismic activity impacts on Earth don't have reverberations like that because it's so dense.
Oh. So maybe first of all, were they trying to ring it, or like they were doing it intentionally, or they just, let's just jettison this thing? And
I think it was an effort towards figuring out the density of the
experiment.
Yeah, I think it was an experiment to work on what's the density of the thing.
Yeah, because it could be that there's the crust, right? And I'm going to get this wrong, but there's a mantle, and then there's like fluid, and then there's a core. Like, I mean, is that sort of how? So maybe there's just more fluid or empty chambers or something.
Yeah, or no fluid, and there's sort of I think there may, and there's a lot of debate about whether there's water on the moon, right? And I mean, there's lots of right.
Yeah, I think that the belief was that there's ice in certain locations, and that's one of the things driving people towards trying to colonize like a certain area of the moon.
And they still think that there's ice there? Is that
I believe there is. I believe our listeners will correct us on this post-haste.
There's cool things. This reminds me of something. I remember reading this really great science fiction novel called A Fall of Moon Dust by Arthur C. Clarke when I was a kid. And this was before they'd gone to the moon. And they theorized that the craters, and this might have been a theory going towards why they were so shallow, that they were huge seas of dust, that there was this incredibly fine dust. And in the story, people have colonized the moon, and they take these kind of pleasure cruises across these gigantic seas of dust. And the story is like the Poseidon Adventure on the moon. One of these fucking things sinks into the dust of the moon. It's a really great story. But then they got there and figured out that they aren't huge seas of dust. But I think that was towards saying, why are they so shallow? Maybe they're like, they contain all this fucking moon dust in them.
There was a space program about the moon during the Reagan era, and he killed this program. But the program was they were going to try to send robots to the moon that could basically harvest natural elements, like because there are these rare metals or something, and then it would actually start to build structures. So the idea was, I mean, we didn't have robotics like this. It was kind of a pie in the sky project, but they were going to try to create something that would build a base there entirely through autonomous robotics. But I think Reagan was like, this is too expensive, and he pulled the plug on it.
There was no need to do it either, because of course the Nazis had abandoned bases there, Steve. So they could have just gone and occupied one of those. Why build one, Steve? They're already there. There's already plenty of them. The Nazis left them behind. But there's all kinds of, there's a lot of things about weird moonquakes. Then there's all kinds of things that people say as proof of this, because I guess the orbit of it is circular. I think it's a circular orbit that the moon has. There's no wobbling. That it's sort of like it has most objects have a wobbling. This has a perfectly circular orbit. It seems, everything's sort of saying it's kind of artificial in some way. This was something I thought was kind of an interesting little fact. Was one of the things people point to is the fact that you have perfect solar eclipses. In other words, and this is from luminary Isaac Asimov, he observed, what makes a total eclipse so remarkable is the sheer astronomical accident that the moon fits so snugly over the sun. The moon is just large enough to cover the sun completely at times.
Holy shit.
So a temporary night falls and stars spring out. The sun's greater distance makes up for its greater size. There's no astronomical reason why the sun and the moon should fit so well.
I never thought of that.
It's the sheerest of coincidences. This is Asimov saying that it is very weird that the moon fits perfectly over the sun. And so
suggesting that it might be artificial.
Suggesting that something put it there. Somebody drove this thing into orbit knowing that they'd protect us from the sun occasionally or something. I don't know why they did it, but that somehow they did it on purpose so that it would block the sun.
Yeah, because the chances are so low for that to just accidentally line up.
It is. I think the chances are astronomical, Steve, that I'm a fucking idiot, that it would fit perfectly over the sun. The other thing I think is that they know, I think for a fact, that the moon seems to be much older than the Earth.
Well, I hadn't heard that. I heard that. Here's what I heard about that, and we'll see when our listeners.
Wait a minute, I really stunned you. I think that's a first on here. You went fucking silent, brother. I absolutely. I challenge, man. You had no comeback for that, did you?
All right, let me try this on you. I had heard. Amongst my drinking buddies, that the moon was formed when another structure hit the Earth and basically ripped off a huge cloud of detritus, just sort of earthy material that then sort of was looping around us because of the gravitational pull, and it slowly formed into the moon. And I heard that was some around the same time. Once the Earth had formed, it was only half a billion years later that you get the moon. But you've heard that the moon is older than
I've heard with the guys I hang out with that there's some evidence. Again, this is a lot from these pseudoscience people that the moon is older, seems to be older than and I don't know what it's based in, but that it seems to be older. There's a bunch of different theories about formation of the moon being sort of Earth-related, I think, that it comes out of the Earth or something like that.
It's part of the Earth or something.
Yeah, that it's something like that. But, there's this whole sort of thinking that, but there's lots of, then there's all this sort of there's all these weird surface anomalies and all these weird things that point to there being machinery on the moon, canals having been built. There's weird anomalous things in photographs. There's this thing called the tower that's 5 miles tall that they don't know what the fuck it is. And
is it an optical illusion or the man on the moon?
I'm sure that there's arguments that it's that these are weird optical illusions and stuff. But there's a lot of, what's interesting is that I found interesting about this is the more folkloric aspect of all of this is that there's a whole sort of, in all these different cultures around the world, this sort of myths and stories that there was a time before there was a moon, that these cultures all talk about when there were people, but there was no moon. And the moon appeared.
That's interesting.
And the moon, and there's lots of, in Bolivia, all kinds of places. There's a whole tradition with the Greeks that goes back to this goes way back to, and that there was a whole myth that the original people were called the Pelasgians in Arcadia, sort of in the center of Greece. And they were also called the Procelians, which means the before the moon people, and that they existed before the moon existed. And there's all these theories about that. And one of the cool things that I found that I thought was kind of cool, which I was telling you about the other day, is one of the things that the hollow moon people, moon is a spaceship people rely on, is this Zulu legend about the moon.
And Zulu is what is Zulu like? Is East African or something? It's a tribe that...
It's South Africa. Yeah, it's South Africa. And, amazing, hugely powerful military.
Yeah, huge empire for a long time.
Huge empire and amazing people. So the story with this is cool. I thought this was really cool. The moon was brought into orbit around the Earth by two brothers, Wowane and Mpanku, reptilian fishmen, sort of these kind of half fish. I know.
The reptilians.
Easy.
Here we go.
Easy. These kind of half, and still, like you just say, this persists, this idea. They had stolen the moon from the great fire dragon in the form of an egg, and they emptied the yolk which made it circular. They brought it to Earth. Earth was shrouded in a kind of mist perpetually, and when it was brought into orbit around the Earth, it caused a huge deluge, which covered the Earth and then sank away, and it facilitated the sort of man being able to rise out of this somehow. And so this is like what people point to, and they're like, look, the Zulus are telling us that this is a vehicle that fish people flew here.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. Isn't that cool?
But there are these stories, like you said, in many cultures about like pre-humans.
Yeah. But this is literally these guys flew it here. They flew in a vehicle, and then that's what it is. It's this vehicle. And so, of course, you were just saying it persists now to this idea that there are reptile people flying around in the moon, and that they're and that it's a vehicle that the reptile people are flying around.
Yeah, this guy that we both know of, David Icke, he was a footballer in the UK.
Yes, perfect. And there you go.
You see how this starts.
Call that guy up.
He might have had a few concussions, and he then ends up as a sportscaster. And if you look him up, you'll see some kind of
and the next logical step is the guy who knows that there's. It's like, I mean, any day Al Michaels is going to start talking about how they're fucking, they're
the
fish
moon
people on Mars any day now.
Well, our man David starts small and starts to build towards the moon people. Mm-hmm. His original theory, though, is that there's kind of like a secret society. I mean, this guy's an anti-Semite too. Like he has.
Yes, I want to make sure that we point out that this guy is
we are
not
distancing ourselves from this guy. We're not fans of this guy.
No, I do not endorse this guy.
He believes in the protocols of Zion and like all this crazy blood libel shit. Yeah. But he has a huge following, and he's been very influential. So it is worth just seeing what his theory is, because it's been embraced by a lot of mainstream culture.
Yeah.
And actually, my lights are flickering now. I wonder if that's because I'm starting to reveal the truth. That's fucking scary.
It's happening. Holy shit,
it's happening.
Holy fuck.
Okay, so he thinks that there's a secret society, which is like all of the presidents and all of the royal families are actually Illuminati, but they are being controlled by a race of reptile creatures who live in the moon. And he calls this the moon matrix. And he says they are basically sending a signal to our brains, in particular the left hemisphere, and it's like a complete virtual reality signal that's making us think that, we're sitting in a room talking and we have a podcast, and that, and that I live in Wisconsin,
right?
All this stuff.
We have a podcast. We have
a podcast.
It's all bullshit.
Total bullshit. All bullshit being projected by the lizard people who live in the moon.
Yes.
And David, he tours around and he preaches this and he writes books and he's super popular. Yeah. And now you're starting to see some of it happen in the mainstream. I wouldn't say mainstream, in the periphery of the, political American politics.
Oh, totally. The reptile people think it's a big... What a wild thing. The continuum of a Zulu myth.
Yeah, to this.
Centuries ago to this. Do you think he's drawn on the Zulu part of it? Do you think... Or has it been subsumed into the whole theory to such an extent that the Zulu part of it's gone for a lot of people and it's just become this thing?
It's possible. He's actually, for all the oddness of the guy and for his weird prejudice, he's a smart guy.
Oh no, Steve, what are you about to say? Okay, all right, good. Okay,
he's actually not a dumb guy. I mean, he's well read and
he's a cunning guy. I would say
he's a cunning guy. Yes, smart is not the right word here, but he's not he's not just he seems to believe, and I think he actually might be what they call a schizotypal character. And this is, you're not schizophrenic, but you are on a continuum with schizophrenia, and it's called schizotypal. Mm-hmm. And this is something that we should actually maybe bring in, because schizotypal just means that you have a very strong tendency towards paranormal belief, really strange stuff, And it's what we would call like, it's not a disorder really. It's more like, we would call it like an imagination, like overdose almost. Like your imagination is just working.
And overdrive.
Working on overload. Yeah, overdrive. And so he seems to believe all this stuff, and it's mixed with movies.
And so it's that thing we talk about a lot, where it's somebody who has lost the mechanism or the ability to distinguish. This is something that's not real.
Exactly right.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you and I, fortunately, are not schizotypal.
Well, we might be.
No, because
speak for yourself.
No, don't say that. Don't say that, because I think I can actually tell. I think I can still tell.
No,
oh my God.
There's actually we don't fit the bill because it's actually in the DSM, the Diagnostic Manual in Psychology. Schizotypal character is somebody has a tendency to believe very intense magical thinking, but also they have very poor social skills, and they're not very emotional, and that doesn't fit you or I. You know what I mean?
Because we are just, yep, that's true. That's true. I'm a bundle of emotions, yes.
One quick Kubrick story that our man David tells is he thinks that if you see Kubrick's last movie, which is Eyes Wide Shut, that he says Kubrick was an insider. This is David's theory.
Yeah.
And that as he was about to die, Kubrick realized he needed to expose the evil plot of the Illuminati. Yes.
Right. Yeah.
So he created a movie. And if you remember that movie, there are these weird kind of ritualistic, sexual orgies, murders.
Yeah, sure.
And
interesting.
There's a Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman film, right?
Well,
and
there
he
you
says
go.
that was the exposure. And then immediately after, Kubrick dies. So David thinks that's what happened there.
That's interesting. I forgot to mention also that actually there's a whole school of thought that The Shining is his confession that he made the moon landing films. And there's people who've combed through The Shining and see all the yeah, why not? Sure. You know what? This will be the movie that I make where I reveal that, I'll do it in The Shining. Nobody will suspect
Nobody
that.
will know. But you have to listen to Dark Side of the Moon while you're watching it.
There's all kinds of clues. There's kind of numerological stuff. The kid has a sweatshirt there's a sweater at one point with a rocket on it that says Apollo on it. There's all these things. There's a whole documentary about
Easter eggs throughout the film.
Yes, right, exactly. Gigantic Easter eggs. Oh my God, unbelievable. The whole hollow moon thing is too fucking good. I got to tell you, man, it's a rich topic. It's a bottomless fucking topic. But it's so crazy to me. The lizard man part of it is really, really interesting to me.
Yeah, and that there's continuity from these ancient folklore stories.
Yeah, but that's fascinating. What is that, man? Is it just sitting in our heads?
No, even our man Lucian says that the creatures were serpentine in nature.
Right.
What,
So weird. Which brings us now to more folklore stuff, because there's a lot of weird... I'm going to, if you don't mind, with your permission.
No, with my permission, yes.
I'm going to go to another folkloric thing because this is weird about weird kind of like a continuity of strange imagery about the moon. And this was, I always wondered what the origin of the man in the moon thing is. Why? What is the man in the moon? Why is there this whole idea that there's a man in the moon? And I was fascinated to see. I mean, it goes way back. There's all kinds of things. But there's all sorts of theories and folk tales about this. Some people think that there's a guy in the book of Numbers in the Bible who was gathering sticks on the Sabbath, and so he was punished by God and sent to the moon. So that's not in the book of Numbers, but that the theory is that it was that guy who got sent to the moon. There's all kinds of stories amongst the Northwest Coast indigenous people of a kid gathering sticks, and he's told by his father that the moon will light the task so he can do it all night, and the kid complains and says, I don't want to do it all night, and he gets banished to the moon. He gets punished by being sent to the moon. And there's a lot of this weird stuff with the moon being... One of the ones that I really liked was a legend I found of a Chinese legend of a guy named Wu Gong, who was kind of the Chinese Sisyphus.
Oh.
There was thinking that there was a forest on the moon. The Chinese, this idea that there was a forest on the moon. So there's different versions of why he murdered his wife, so he was banished to the moon. He was lazy and kept stopping studying to be a Taoist immortal and stopping studying because he was lazy. So he got sent. So he got sent to the moon to cut down one particular tree that would always grow back. He'd cut it down and it would grow back. He'd cut it down and it would grow back. But it's weird. And there's I saw a lot of these things about kind of trees, sticks,
trees, and moonlight.
Gathering things in a forest and stuff like that, which is weird because what's the connection between sort of like, it's really strange.
That is strange. Like, I wonder, we forget this because we live in so much artificial light, but sometimes you'll have like a full moon and you'll go outside or you'll look out your back window or something. And you're like, oh my God, it's like it's flooded with light. So I bet you
flooded with light.
That kind of light must have been really valuable for humans who had no way to see what the fuck was going on.
Sure. Yeah, sure.
And you could gather firewood and you could see predators, and it probably was a magical time,
for sure,
for our ancestors or something.
And then the strange patterns on it, you were reading onto it. You could just and you really see it so clearly at that time. You could see. I learned an interesting term, which I didn't know, which is lunar pareidolia.
Oh, pareidolia.
Which is this imagined patterns, pareidolia, which is imagined patterns and images seen by human beings, and in this case, on the moon.
Interesting.
Yeah, which is really cool. And there's an enormous number, I thought this was really interesting, of rabbit imagery from all these different cultures associate rabbits with there being a rabbit on the moon. And there's all there's women, crows, frogs, a moose, dragons, all different kinds of things. In Brazil, there's some thought it's St. George slaying the dragon, but a rabbit recurs a lot in a lot of these different myths and legends, that there's a rabbit on the moon. And it's strange. A sort of, the rabbit in the moon. Oh God, there were so many great ones. There was that
pareidolia thing is like one of the reasons, like it's basically recognizing patterns or seeing patterns where they may not be there.
Right.
And and some people have suggested that's why like the schizotypal mind is not been like weeded out like from evolution, because why would you have something that was so maladaptive still in the population? And the theory is that even though like being schizotypal makes you believe in a lot of wacky stuff, it also makes you very creative and imaginative, and you see a lot of pareidolia.
Interesting. You read all these patterns.
Yeah.
There was a great one too in the 1950s. Moroccans saw the face of their exiled king, Muhammad V. They thought that they could see his face in the moon, which I thought was kind of great.
There's cool.
There's great Japanese stories of a princess from the moon who sort of she's found in a kind of like tiny form in a stalk of bamboo, and she's released, and then she grows up and everybody wants her hand in marriage, but she just wants to go back to the moon, and she ends up going back to the moon and stuff like that. And it's really
a Chinese
cool.
story like that too. That's why you eat the moon cake, right?
Yes, that's exactly right.
Festival.
Yes, and she drinks too much of an immortality potion and for some reason ends up on the moon. And then that's right. There's the whole moon cake festival and all that stuff. It's really cool. Well, that was a ton of fun. We really hope you enjoyed this Chinwag. Thank you for listening. We have bonus content coming your way in a few days, so please keep an eye out for that. And don't forget to like us, follow us, rate us, and review us. All that kind of good stuff. We'd love to hear from you. And until next time, wag on.
Chinwag is a production of Treefort Media and Touchy Feely Films. Hosted and executive produced by Paul Giamatti and Stephen Asma. Executive producers for Treefort are Kelly Garner and Lisa Ammerman. Dan Carey is executive producer for Touchy Feely. Our series producer is Rachel Whitley Bernstein. Original theme music by Luke Topp, with additional music by Via Mardot. Oscar Guido is our executive in charge of production. Tom Monahan is head of audio for Treefort. Audio production supervision by Matt Dyson. Editing and mixing by Jeff Neal. Animation created by Alex Sokol. Research assistance by Aidan Brooks. Lastly, for more information, go to chinwagpod.fm and find us on Instagram or TikTok at chinwagpod or on Twitter at chinwag_pod.